Welcome back. Welcome back to Tug of Heart. Before we get going, thank you, Strong Island. I like that. We're going to have to do more with that Strong Island because that's a very universal um, term. It's something that people can enjoy in a lot of different places. Um, Happy 2nd of February. Today is especially well, I shouldn't say it's today, but this month is important for getting in touch with your heart because here in about 12 more days, we'll be celebrating Valentine's Day. And, well, maybe we'll all get some little heart-shaped chocolates and some Cadbury eggs. Today's kind of a big day. You ask why? Well, Lori's back. Hi, Lori.
Hello, and I'm in good health.
Good. Tell us, how was it?
Um, it wasn't as bad as many people who've had it, but it was very unpleasant to say the least.
So let me go ahead and step in here and say right off the bat, she recalls it differently than she experienced it because she did not sound good. Oh, and I love my sister.
It
She's so
hurt. It
strong.
hurt.
Yeah, but when I would get her on the phone, she'd be like, "Hello, hello. I don't want to talk too much." And I said, "Lori, put down the Marlboro no filter short sticks because you sound terrible." And so, welcome back, Lori. While you were gone, I held the fort down, didn't do much. I read a story. I hope you got to hear it from
It's
your.
it's actually a kind of a sad story, tender at least for me.
It's funny because all I got out of that story when I wrote it was the triumph at the end
Yes. Hmm.
and the figuring it out. And so that's what we're here to do. Today's a big day because we are at the request of Lori. We're going to talk about crying. Now, I don't have a whole lot of um, I don't have a lot to contribute because it's been a long time since I cried, but I feel like I probably got one coming on. I've been saying that for a couple of years now, but I mean, it's probably been 35 years since I had a good cry. And I don't know why. I guess I was just kind of brought up in a very, and I was brought up with a father that's like, that doesn't pay good dividends. Crying's kind of useless. But I've come to understand that there's a lot of reasons that it's good. Uh, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I think I'm going to start off by thanking those of you that have contributed at the Tug of Heart open forum on Facebook. Thank you for your contributions. Um, they're helpful and we can reflect on them and we can start to engage at a different level or at least a different style because it'd be really neat to continue this. It's important for us to have um, just more perspectives to draw from and to think about and consider. Um, when we started, when Lori told me, "Oh, we're going to talk about crying," I'm like, "Well, I don't know a lot about crying." So I quickly did a little bit of research and looked within myself, and I started saying, "Well, there's two types of crying." Well, I'm sure there's more than two, but two that I immediately identify with. And there's crying and there's sobbing, and there's crying, which is in kind of an unwilling, um, traumatic. And I mean, this is going to be very universal. So we're stumbling through this like always. And then there's sobbing. And sobbing is like something that really more emotional trauma than physical trauma. Um, and I think both of these have a lot to do with like the surprise aspect and being caught off guard. Lori, help me out here. I don't know a lot about crying. I do remember crying. I feel like crying is good, but talk to us about crying.
Well, in terms of crying, this is something I've thought more about than I guess one would want to. You and I are generally what I would consider a little bit more stoic. We don't cry. Some might call it like the ice king and queen syndrome. We're intact in pretty tough situations for the most part. We have sat at our father's side as he passed, and did what we should to in the way that we felt, by being strong, by repressing tears so we wouldn't add to his own anxieties about passing and such. Same with our sister. We kind of have that feeling where we would want to be strong, a strong side support. And then there's life that will push you over and into crying territory. One of the things that comes up when we talk about crying and weeping is if it's a universal, what does it stand for? What or purpose does it serve? It must serve some purpose, and just to clarify, as we talk about this today, the assumption is that crying is an honest cry, truthful. So we're not talking about crocodile tears or manipulative, nothing like that. But in terms of like really crying, as in something inside you was moved and you reacted with tears or sobbing, what is crying all about? What I have come to is that it's kind of a recognition or a deep understanding that there is some damage has been done in the world. And so I feel like either there is the person crying who recognizes the damage, or who is feeling the damage or feeling damaged because of it. And it's something that needs to be set right. So, I think, we can go into the social aspects which we might get into later. We'll leave that alone for now, but there's also the empathy aspect where you feel that movement in another person and you join in their suffering, and maybe shed a tear because somebody else does. So my thinking was, what is going on that prevents some people from crying, sometimes makes us even stifle some tears, to either one, appear strong, or to not trouble people. Because a lot of times, like if I would not cry, it would be I don't want to burden somebody, or I don't want to make them, carry them down with this weight that I'm feeling. And I had mentioned to you, in this day and age, which is practically like a segment of this now, that we're in a time of kind of like that's very anti-suffering. And this came about when you were talking about vulnerability. What is the world's attitude towards vulnerability in general? And with this idea of anti-suffering, I think it leads people to not exactly be familiar with crying and what it does, and if there is such a thing, what a good proper cry actually serves within us and for our heart. So what do you think about in general, like this anti-suffering and vulnerability? Do you think the world sees vulnerability and crying in the same way? And what do you think the attitude is towards each, especially crying?
I'm gonna say yes. As far as we've come, we're further behind than ever before, because you might be forward thinking, and as advanced as the world is, and as forward thinking as we are or claim to be, it's still kind of nice when a guy picks up the check. That's and crying for all that we've come to believe, and we can talk about it, and it can be this psychological cathartic uh, usefulness to crying, but we still look at crying in the old fashioned way of weakness.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's how I was brought up.
And a kind of losing, right? Sometimes because I see people say things that face to face could make somebody cry, but with social media, people say it so openly. And if somebody appears wounded, which my perception would be, wow, that really hurt. That would make them cry. There's almost sometimes a celebration on the part of whoever's landed that blow. Like, yeah, good, good, good.
I think that's a whole different topic,
Okay.
because you're right. And there is, it's that old thing, where you want to just let people know, especially on social media, snuffing my candle doesn't increase the light emitted from yours.
Right.
If you've got a weak burn, it's just a weak burn. We need to figure that out, not dash my, or, snuff my candle. But the crying itself is, who among us has not heard get a hold of yourself when you're crying?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And yet the crying is actually, if we're to believe and admit and accept the fact that it does have a benefit, well, that, you could literally respond by saying, that's exactly what I'm doing.
I got too good a hold of my feelings.
By crying, I am gathering myself,
Right.
I am getting a hold of myself. Again, I'm at a little bit of a loss because it's been so long, but there's an endorphin release. It's like this, oof, what did you really get out? I don't know. I mean, but as Lori would say, this day and age, you may cry to relieve some tension, some stress, some buildup, but in that crying will create some other issues, because depending on who saw you cry, that could be an issue, because crying is still not an attractive thing, and I'm talking messy cry, mascara running. And then, when I do that, my wife doesn't like it. No, I'm just kidding. But I guess I was thinking that what leads up to a good cry or a good sob, because I guess I look at it like filling a cup or a jar with water, and you fill it and you fill it and you fill it, and then it finally spills over. And that's the episode. That's the crying. That's the sobbing. So what were we doing up until, which is, I mean, my mind thinks the way it thinks, but I started wondering what happens. I mean, are we just at a point where physically our body can't take anymore, and so we release? So what happened while we were filling that jug, all those things that led up to the episode, and we'll refer to it as the episode. I mean, are we just with the finger in the dam, and the dam's filling, and then once we pull the finger, there it goes. There's no stopping it now.
Sometimes, maybe, yeah.
I don't know. So,
go ahead.
So that's what I was considering, is like that in between time, are we in a constant state of stifling emotions until we get to the point where there is no containing it any longer? I don't know. I've been so far so good. I guess I'm the eternal optimist. But I feel when I was reading this story, Lori, I read it, and the funny part, I always laugh because the funny part is that I wrote it, I know what's coming, and yet it always gets me. Not to the point of crying, but I mean, I definitely feel something.
Right.
The story, My Clean Clothes.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm Lori, walk me through this. Tell me.
I think it's when we're talking about the heart, the first thing, the starting point always is relational. And so I think it's what we can relate to and how we can relate to other people and what their experience is. So I think when you hear a story like that, you're able to share in that experience at a point where you get that something, um, which, for the very brave will take it so far as to tears. You were saying about filling a cup, right? What is this, like filling a cup? Incidentally, people where they got this idea of tears of the heart, this has got to be like Socrates, somewhere around there. They used to think that when you had a heart injury, your heart let out like a steam, a vapor, and because it rose up to your eyes, then it would fall. So that was just like a condensation. And I actually am like, that's not unreasonable, because they must have identified some kind of feeling somewhere in between the heart, the physical heart, that heavy feeling in the throat, and they must have thought, like, kind of theorized from that. um as far as where tears come from, I think the two types of crying that I think of are tears of pain, where we're in pain and we are expressing that we need help. It's like a very honest, it's like our most center part of us, the natural part of us, the heart takes over, and there, without interference, it's this true expression of crying. I need help. This is too much. I can't do this alone. I won't do this alone, or I don't want to do this alone. And I think the other kind of crying, now these are what I consider the two true kinds of crying, are when we cry not because we were in pain, but we have caused pain. And of course, the tears of pain can also be a pain we feel that somebody else is experiencing. And so I think when it does come on, it's more of like we have deferred to the heart because we can no longer express in an appropriate way what we're like. It's something that physically and in a physical vocal way we can't express what would do for us, so we cry. And I think it's limiting to think that as an adult you have more words, so you cry less, because I think there has to be some things that are a little mysterious in life where we just don't feel right. And I think there are some things that just hurt so deeply that we would be pushed to tears. And if we think, well, I have been there and that with time I can better capture it with words, then you have probably or we, I should say, have probably kind of slowed or stopped growing, because there should be another level that we would reach of compassion, shared suffering, human experience. Because as big as love can expand, the pain should match it, or else love is just sentiment, and it's not. There's some true physical and true heart commitment that needs to happen with that.
So you're talking a lot about crying with an audience.
Well, or alone, that's still a truth being said. I could speak a truth in my room, and it doesn't make it less true. For God believing, it could be to God. For those who speak to ancestors, it could be for them.
So I was referring. So I was referring to crying as a signal, as a beacon for help, a distress signal. Same for an audience.
I think I agree that I'm saying the same thing.
So I'm just trying to put this in my head. I mean, I can understand where you would cry because, number one, you feel alone. Everything is just within you, and so subconsciously you cry, you let it out, you get somebody else to join you or join your fight, your, kind of divvy up the pain, metaphorical or physical. They're there, that'll be okay. Going, it's okay. We're going to be able to fix this.
It
It
could be
looks
saying
worse
it
than it is.
right. Well, and it could be, we could also just be saying it to ourselves. If I don't know that I'm going to cry and then I cry, it's enough that I heard the crying. I witnessed my own crying because it is saying the same thing. I need help, or I desire companionship for this part. And sometimes we may believe we don't. That's okay too, because I think crying can be a private matter. But to keep it genuine, it has to rise from that place. And we can't always control the dynamics of our environment for when that does arise.
Lost me.
Huh?
You lost me.
Well, I'm saying that we would cry authentically, whether or not we have an audience. But so sometimes that feeling of needing to cry, and crying just happens, whether or not we happen to be around people. And so we can't control that it happened right here. Had it happened a mile away, you might be in good company for it to happen. But when it truly happens, it just does. And it doesn't change the message. I think that we need consolation. But I also think, having said that, it is a type of service to not always withhold crying openly. Sometimes when you need to cry, I think you can serve other people by being willing to do it openly, because somebody may need to see someone cry. I had mentioned that there's this duty to console the afflicted. And I had said there's also this idea that we need to sometimes afflict the consoled, the already consoled, so that their heart is able to open up a little bit. Because when we cry, we're letting something out because we've let something in. If we're unable to cry, we were unable to let something in to that extent, right?
I got to think about that. I got to process that.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's
That's a
because that's a
lot.
yeah, and it's not something you have to agree with. All this part is just thinking out loud. But I think as an exercise, if people have not cried, that they you'd have to consider, at least hypothetically, that have you felt another's pain then? Truly their extent of pain. Because if somebody has been so pained that they are crying, and you feel their pain, but you are not brought to tears, then have you been able to fully feel the extent of another person's suffering? And there's no right or wrong if you have or have not, just that it's a matter of us growing. I mean, with
But
growth.
is that, I got to challenge you a little bit, maybe
Yes,
because I'm
go
learning
ahead.
something here, but that's kind of challenging the authenticity of concern. I mean, if we weigh it by whether or not we were brought to tears by, whatever ails the heart, the mind, the soul of another, I mean, we all mourn in different ways.
Right, but if you
And
felt what they felt, um that's like saying, if my child breaks their leg, I don't need to feel a true sensation of a snapped shin in my own body to just feel the helplessness and extent of just suffering. And when somebody's suffering is at a certain extreme, then it would, I think, demand an extreme reaction.
so I was brought up, same father.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad told me, he's like, if one person's hurting, that's already enough. We don't
Right.
need two people to hurt because one person needs to keep their bearings. I mean, as crude as that may sound, it's like the person crying is already feeling bad. They need to know that not only solace, but relief for the situation is kind of got their wits about them. Like,
100%.
like,
100.
you're crying. I see that. I'm here with you. I pledge, uh, you know, to be here in this time, but let me get to work on the solution so that you can feel what you feel. And isn't that why we bring dinners when a loved one passes away? We're like, listen, you need to feel what you feel. So we're not going to cry with you, but we're going to make all the meals so that you can go through your Shiva, your wake, whatever you want to
Right.
call it.
Mhm.
We're um, we're gonna go ahead and meet all the other needs because you need to do this. I can't, and I think it's very personalized. I can't do it with you. There's no benefit to me in doing it with you. But what I can do is I can fill your car up with gas, get it washed. You got a lot of things coming. Let me make some arrangements. Let me pay a couple of bills for you. Let me make a couple of meals for you. And so that Joanne always tells me only she decided a long time ago only one of us is allowed to have a bad day at a time. We can't both have a bad day on the same day because well, it just doesn't work. Because then you're going to be competitive over who had the shittier day, you know. So, oops, sorry, didn't mean to say that.
That's okay.
Um,
We're not PG.
but uh, but yeah, like I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to process that, but
Okay,
my upbringing is a little different.
well, I share the same upbringing, and I think I find that um, to be a very good quality. And actually, it's something I rely on you for a lot. And I don't think it's wrong, but what can be mistaken, not wrong, is that is being functional. Okay, and we're talking about being. There are certain pains that will not be resolved by anything functional in this world. And take, for instance, you've done so much for me in my suffering, right? With Seth specifically. Um, but when it gets down to the brokenness, and in those moments of me being completely broken, the day I had to call you and tell you about my little boy, there is not any amount of busy that would replace you sitting in my suffering with, and I know you did this, with sometimes even taking the coals on your head, I would call it, just sitting there burning and not knowing, and maybe suffering more than me while I did the functioning. We're talking about in the heart. And so I believe with all of me, it does happen. And I believe I have seen you do that when it's just that you're sitting there in the helplessness that was due me while I sat strong with Seth and got him through another MRI, another whatever he did not want to do. Right.
Mm.
And now we are talking about crying. This does not mean to me that water needs to be dropping, because there's also a crying that I would call just simply mourning.
I guess that's a very important distinction because in as much as we say my heart breaks for you, it's not really breaking, it's a metaphorical breaking.
But it
And
could.
right. And so I think that gives me a tremendous amount of comfort because crying is not I don't think you have to be puffy eyed and sobby to
No,
cry.
no, you don't.
You know, yeah.
No, because to me, that would be qualifying the crying more than asking for this true tugging of heart, which is what we're talking about. Because I know for a fact I flat out told you there are some things I need your help. And it kind of required um, the stoicism that only you could provide, where it's like, you need to be strong. Please don't cry. When I say I'm not, this is my limit of talking. We stop, you move it. Very specific survival skills that came into it. And it's not that you can be so practical about all these things, but it's, do I feel you wept with me, and I feel there are days that I was relieved of that inevitability of just crying and not moving, paralyzed in tears. And instead, I would say, I'm not going to talk to you today. There's a lot going on. I need you to be able to do this. And you're going to get ignored and probably not thanked. And that's offering your heart to be broken and then rejected, and which is a whole other level of breaking, doing it alone. That's alone suffering because I could not manage that day.
So, without getting beyond what would make practical sense, and this may go over into, likely it's going to go into our second podcast for the week, which will be next Tuesday. But I have to ask you, I don't want to stray from, your loved ones that surround you, that administer triage and, fight a remediation fight with you. But we're talking about crying, specifically crying. And, did it restore emotional imbalance, or did it just provide emotional balance?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it a coping mechanism? We're talking about crying, just crying. I mean, we can start dicing hairs, but we should probably stay very true to the word crying. And, is it an anesthetic? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? Is it a coping mechanism?
I think it's an honest expression of your heart. It's a type of surrender to the true condition you find yourself in, where sometimes, say somebody makes a mistake, and a mistake that hurts somebody, you might cry. And the only thing I am going to say is, tears or not, you may feel a cry because you have wounded another person. Or you could just be so angry, damn it, that I made this mistake, so angry. But that's not exactly crying about it. That's more like prideful, that you're more upset that a mistake was made than I'm hurt that I hurt another. And so I don't think there's a predictable, because sometimes it is just stuff we do. Um, and also, there is a certain element of being, like you said, I think being kind of caught unaware, that pushes us into crying when we aren't suspecting it.
When I think about crying, Lori, and we will have to start to kind of put a bow on this. But when I think about crying, and I think about the crying that I did as a child, because it's been a long time since I really cried. Most often it was like I got found out. I was embarrassed. And those are the times in which I remember crying more than most others.
Well, yeah, that is an honest, that's the same recognition, whether voluntary or otherwise, that something has been pushed into disorder because of you. And that's what I had said originally, was that that's one kind of crying, that you have done a damage or caused a disorder, and recognizing that can bring tears.
No, I meant more just embarrassment. Like I was embarrassed and I cried because I was embarrassed.
Yeah, because
The light was on me. It's like maybe it was truth that I was stifling. And that's what I remember. I don't remember crying so much from pain. I remember, I mean, some really ugly circumstances, but just, yeah, I guess we're gonna have to dig a little bit further. Lori, that's a good place to stop. We're not gonna change the topic
What
one
time?
bit.
How much time do we have now?
We got about 2.5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to read you something that'll take maybe three. I was going to not read this. This was my failed attempt to write something because I'd asked you to write about the prescription of tears. And I attempted to start. I'm going to read it to you real quick, okay?
Go.
The prescription is tears, but what good is the remedy if you cannot point to what ails you? Where will you go to find where the suffering began? This suffering that crept in undetected and proceeded with authority because you welcomed the day the pain stopped, and with it, the tears. Will you go back a decade? There was discomfort then, an awareness of an undercurrent, but still a greater commitment to having an insight equal to the stature and achievement too full on display to retreat. Now, and then I can see you in a time far behind that, with chest broad and jutting towards the marked ideal your dad wanted to see you reach, so he could see it reached, if not by his strength, then by his lineage. Where he seated would be erased by his seated. If you could surpass with face straight, and you would succeed him. Still training. This life was right in theory, but the context was so wrong. Here for adjustment and strengthening, true, but the proper end was lost in that exchange. Your nature still strong, and you still so small. Mouth twisted as the photographer snapped the portrait that would serve as the evidence for the guilt and innocence of your heart's determination. A smile at the coaxing to capture a happy boy, a good boy, a content boy. Overturned by the frown of overcorrection. You aimed for stoic, but wound up depicting the fight upon your face, not yet fully obedient to the instructions given as your standing hair was drowned into submission by the water between the teeth of the black comb. You don't have to always smile for pictures, you know. You didn't have to look silly because you were young. What was meant was not that you did not have to smile, but that you should not smile. How you must have thought of this on the cold walk, even as we made each other laugh all the way to the bus stop. You dared not spoil my fun just because it was time for you to man up. So we goofed, and then you sat a little higher, a little straighter as we reached the end of the ride. Did I continue playing, not knowing when to stop? Did you have to give me a little shove so I knew you were serious? It was fine for you to finish being young and silly with me. I might have cried, or at least my eyes got wet. You might have ignored this in your resolve to be strong. You could make it up to me on the walk back through the snow later. You could use your new tough to take a lick from me, and that would cancel out the lump in my throat left by the separation of boys from girls I wasn't expecting. I didn't know that counted for twins. That's as far as I got. We'll continue there, but the point is, that was my thoughts about crying stopped around the same time that Too Much Joy did.
We're going to pick this up right where we're leaving it right now because
Okay.
we're not done with crying. With that, thank you for listening. Please continue to comment, like, share, and as always, thank you, Strong Island. Thank you for hosting us.
Thanks,
And with
Bobby.
that, adios.
Adios.